I have something to confess. I think this is going pretty well, if that's all right. You guys, wouldn't you say this relationship has been going relatively well? I think that's fair to say. I love you guys. You guys have been nothing but a blessing to me. I hope you can say the same regarding me, but before we continue with this relationship, there's something I need to tell you. It's hard to say, and I hope you don't look at me any differently. Wow, this is, okay, there's no easy way to say this, but I can't stand foot washing. I said it, I'm sorry. I don't like it. Listen, I've been part of a church my entire life. I've been part of the church my entire life. And when I was in high school, I became a church leader. And the perks of being a church leader is you can volunteer for any position you want. And I took advantage of that. Whenever communion would come around, I would always volunteer to be the water boy. I would run and I would dump out the buckets and I'd fill them up and I'd hand them to the people that are doing God's work, but not me. I was just running the water. And the team would always say, Gavin, we're so happy to have you on the team, but nobody knew my true motive. I was doing it to get out of foot washing. That's terrible. I know it's terrible. You don't have to pretend like it's a good thing. It's not. Every once in a while, I get caught by someone who would want to wash my feet. Hey, can I wash your feet? I guess so. But for the most part, it was a pretty foolproof plan. And there's two reasons that I can't stand foot washing. I'm not just going to say that I don't like it and just let that be. For one, I think a lot of you know this, feet are gross. They're sweaty and they're stinky. And if you're like me, this is the biggest reason. The second one is my feet are gross, sweaty, and stinky. Listen, I love you guys, but there's a reason that I always wear shoes everywhere I go. It's not like I know a few people I know like walk into a house and just kick back. They take their socks off and everything. I can never do that. That's a little weird for me. And here's the thing, is communion always seems to sneak up on me as well. It's always the night after I'm like, man, I should really cut my toenails. And it's like communion, It's terrible. Oh man. So we've had 3 communions since I've been here. I've been here for 9 months now, which is crazy to think about. It's flown by. You guys are the best. My first communion, I got off lucky. I was in here doing children's story. So while you guys are washing feet, I was up here. The last communion, I was preaching in Miami, so I wasn't here. But the second one, I'll be very honest with you guys, and I really hope you don't look at me differently. I hid in my office. I did. I really did. I'm sorry. And at the end of it, I wanted to give the illusion that I was there the whole time. So I went out and hey, how you guys doing? It was crazy, stinky feet, right? And as I was walking, I ran into 2 of our young adults from the vault. And they came up to me and they let me know that this is like totally gross. And I couldn't help but agree with them. And I said, I think that's the point. Because this is what Jesus did right before he got crucified. In fact, it was probably grosser then because of the dirt roads and open sandals, but he did it as an act of humility. And he asks us to do the same. And as I said that, it hit me like a truck. It hit me like a truck. In my personal studies, I've been reading the book of Hebrews, and I love the book of Hebrews because it addresses the legalist Jew and the flippant Christian in a culmination of God's love for his people. Now, I hope if you haven't read Hebrews, that was a good enough poll to read it. But one thing that snuck up on me, or one thing that stands out to me, is chapter 2 of Hebrews. And I would love to read for you verses 8 and 9. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. Now, in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside of his control. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him. But we see him, for who was a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Now let's break that down because I ran through that pretty quickly. At the beginning, verse 8, it says, now in putting everything in subjection to him. Him here is Adam. And it says in the next part of it, he left nothing outside of his control, him still being Adam, and we can read that from 1 Genesis 28. I'll read it for you guys, but if you want to flip there, feel free to. But in Genesis 1:28, it says, and God blessed them being man and woman. And God said to them, man and woman, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on earth. God left us in charge of everything on this earth. And the question is, have we succeeded? The next part of Hebrews, we'll go back there. It says, at present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him. So, have we succeeded in subjecting everything and doing our role, what God has said? According to this, no, we have not. According to this verse, as humans, we have done some amazing things. Just look at the medicine and science that we have achieved in the last 50 years as humans. I wasn't involved in that, but humans, we have done it. Good job, us. We have found a way to control water and air. We've turned electricity into all of this. We've done pretty good. But there are some things that we cannot do. We ourselves have become subjects to Satan who roams this earth. So what does this mean? We have been tasked to become, not conquerors, that's not the right word, but dominion. We're supposed to control or take care, is a better word, of the entire earth. What does this mean if we have failed and ourselves become subject to Lucifer? Well, it says in verse 9, but we see him. Him. Is this the same him? The same him that has not everything subject to him? Or is this another him? Let's put this section together with the last one that we just read. At present, we do not yet see everything in subjection to him, but we see him. The but here creates a contrast. If you're reading it from a different version, you might already know who this is. The King James Version, which is my favorite version of this verse, says, but we see Jesus, who for a little while was made lower than the angels. This is my favorite part of the verse. Why would Jesus become lower than the angels, and how did he become lower than the angels? Well, right now the angels are above us. Is that fair to say? And Jesus being lower, and let me know if you disagree, became on our level. Does everybody agree with that? But he didn't stop there. So Jesus became lower than the angels. Why? Well, let's continue reading. He was crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Now, don't let the word taste here deter you from what actually is being said. Whenever we taste something, I'll have a taste of that, right? It's a little bit. According to the Garden of Gethsemane, which if you haven't read about, please, it is a very tragic but beautiful story of Jesus literally sweating blood with his taste of death. He's not only tasting, but he is chugging, so to speak, death on our behalf. He died for all of us, and that's why he became lower than the angels. So, what does this have to do with communion? Like I said, Jesus lowered himself lower than the angels, but he did not stop there. We read about this. Turn with me to John 13. John 13. And while we're turning there, I'll give you some background context. In Jewish culture, there's a feast that is celebrated every year. Who can tell me what the name of that is? It's Passover. During this time, this is the Feast of Passover. This is when this is taking place. And during this feast, it is celebrated that the spirit of death had passed over the houses that were covered by the blood of the Lamb. Symbolic. And that's kind of what we're talking about today. But they also celebrate a time of freedom from their Egyptian conquerors. This story takes place over the Passover feast. However, Jesus knew that this was not just a normal Passover. Something bigger was happening. He did not know it, or the disciples didn't know it, but this was Jesus' last night alive. So now that we're at verse 13, or chapter 13, let's go to chapter 21. We know that this was going to be Jesus' last night alive because of verse 21. Chapter 13, verse 21. It says this: Jesus was troubled in his spirit, and he testified. He said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, aka John, was reclining at the table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter moved him to ask to Jesus whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning against Jesus, said, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." And when he dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered him. Jesus said to him, "What you're going to do, do it quickly." No one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money bag, Jesus was telling him, "Buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give some to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Jesus knew that he was about to be betrayed by one of his closest friends. We skipped a little bit ahead in this story, so maybe this is after the point where Jesus had pulled Judas aside at the beginning of this chapter and said, "I know what you're about to do, and I'm not a fan." And maybe he gave him a piece of his mind. We don't know quite yet. But before we go back to the beginning part, let's flip down a little bit more into verse 36, because there is another in Jesus' midst. There's another betrayer on his hands. While you're trying to find where that is, Jesus at this point gives his disciples a new commandment. And after this, he tells them, "There's a place that I'm going that you cannot follow." And this is what Peter said in verse 36. Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered him, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me, but you will follow after." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay my life down for you." And Jesus said, "Will you lay your life down for me? I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. Jesus knew not only about Judas, but Peter. Not only was Peter in the 12 disciples, he was in his immediate circle. He knew that one of his closest friends was going to betray him before the night was done. Jesus knows how everything's going to happen. So let's now go to the beginning of the chapter, which is, now with the knowledge that we know, let's go and reread that and see if the story is a little different from what you've heard before. The disciples are crowding into this small room, which is ready for their feast. As they walk in, the inn is filled with lamb, and they are very, very hungry. The disciples notice that Jesus has been quiet for a while. So Matthew is super excited to hear what lesson Jesus has cooking for tonight. Peter tries to crack a few jokes to make his teacher laugh. Andrew goes up to Judas, who is sweating bullets at this point, and says, "Man, you need to relax. It's Passover. The Lord will provide all the funds that we have and that we need. Just be here with us and not in that little scheming mind of yours." Jesus, upon hearing this, tries not to cry. He knows that Andrew's words have fallen on deaf ears, for Judas has already been infiltrated by Satan. As the disciples pile in surrounding the table, the fisherman's life is hard to leave behind, so they all crowd in and start eating. But Peter is familiar with his wife yelling at him to go wash up before, so he kind of holds back and tells them to do the same. He looks around, and there's no one there to wash their feet. Before they know it, Jesus breaks the silence. He does what he needs. He knows what he needs to do. As the disciples watch their teacher take off his coat, "Judas, come here." Judas walks over, and Jesus' eyes fill up with tears. Although these tears are small and in liquid form, they hold the weight of the world behind them. Jesus is face to face with one who once was his friend, but now he knows that he is not looking at Judas anymore. But the eyes, the gentle gaze of Jesus melts the heart of Judas just a little bit. Jesus stops him, and Jesus by rolling up his sleeves. Judas lowers his head, ready for the punch that he really deserves. And as he looks shamefully at his master's feet, he sees his knees fall closer to them. and he looks up and sees the man he's about to betray lowering and bowing before him. Then he takes the towel from his belt and the water from the basin by the door, and he washes Judas's feet. The disciples stand in shock that the man that they've come to know to be the Messiah is washing their fellow students' feet as if he was just a common slave. He makes his way around the room, and tension builds up in the disciples, but that tension quickly washes away with the mud and dirt on their feet. But when he comes face to face with Peter, the man who knows he will abandon him when it matters the most, the tension is rising so hard for Peter. He steps back and says, "What are you doing? I should be washing your feet. You cannot wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash your feet, you will have no share with me." Peter is overwhelmed by the thought that Jesus will have no share of him. So he says, "Don't just wash my feet, wash all of me. Don't wash my head, wash my hands, wash everything." And this is what Jesus responds with in verse 11. Jesus says, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except his feet, but it is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you is washed." He then puts his coat back on and says this in verse 12. "Do you not understand what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for I am. If then your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, so you ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do just as I have done for you. Truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you who do them. I'm not speaking to all of you. I know whom I've chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I'm telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever receives the one I sent receives me. Whoever receives me receives the one who sent me." Jesus, going back to Hebrews, has now lowered himself lower than the angels. He is now on the same plane as us. But he went the extra step, and he lowered himself. I think foot washing is very gross, not only on other people. I'm like Peter. If that happened to me, I'd be like, you don't know what you're getting into. But what happened here is Jesus, let's paint another picture. The shoes back then, we have nice closed-toed shoes, and all of us have the luxury of showering either this morning or last night. Or if not, maybe tonight. You should really get on that. But the thing about that is we don't all wear open shoes, and we don't have dirt roads that crowd and cling to our feet anymore. Back then, that's what they had. So feet now are gross, but back then, they were dirty. So it wasn't, at least for me, I like to think it wasn't a ceremonial one like we do today where we pour the water on. At least I believe, there's no way of knowing this, but Jesus was in there scrubbing their feet. And he did that to humble himself. Now, what does the creator of the universe, it tells us in the Bible that nothing that was created without him. Everything that we see was created with him. Through the word, all was spoken. What does he have to not be humble about? But he did it as an example. I'm not preaching to you, I'm preaching to me. He humbled himself before not only his disciples, but the man who would walk away when he needs him the most, and the one who would be responsible for his death. Jesus is an action guy, and I like that. He taught by doing, and he asks that we do the same. And if you're like me, you think foot washing is both gross, it's gross and embarrassing. But when you look at Jesus as an example, I realize that that's the point. It'd be easier if Jesus said, do this unto me, give your child a chocolate, and that's what I do, humble yourself. No, he knelt down and washed feet. If you had one more day alive, if the doctor told you you have 24 hours left to live, what would you do? Jesus washed feet. Thankfully, and Lord willing, all of us have more than 24 hours left. But knowing that, he asks us to do the same. The question is, what does your feet look like? Is it being willing to give up your lazy day to help your neighbor move? Is it volunteering at a soup kitchen? Is it picking up trash that you saw someone else throw? Is it maybe going to a concert with your child that's not your favorite music taste, but just to be with your child? Or maybe, let's go a little harder, is it welcoming an ex-con into our church with open arms? Or maybe loving members of the LGBT community as the children of God they are? Or if you're like me, is it washing feet during communion? So, before I pray and before I dismiss you, today these tables look beautiful and everything here, but it's not just for decoration. Today is Communion Sabbath, and I'm very happy to be here with all of you. Now, and if you're like me, we get the chance to wash each other's feet. Not only as the person that we're sitting beside, or the spouse that we are with, or the child or friend, but as family. Let's look to what Jesus has done for his disciples, the ones who are going to betray him. Thankfully, I don't think any of you are trying to kill each other. But if you are, maybe try washing their feet instead. If someone across the church is like, I felt like I need to wash your feet, I'll be very concerned. No, I'd be happy. Now we're going to go dismiss to wash each other's feet. And after that, we're going to come back here and partake in what Jesus did after this with his disciples. We'll get into that after. But for now, let's go wash some feet. There's going to be some deacons in the back, and they'll point you in the direction that you need to be. I'll see you all here very soon. Thank you so much. Oh, before you go, let me pray. Let me pray. Dear Father in heaven, Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for not only lowering yourself lower than the angels, but humbling yourself before fellow man. God, you have nothing that you need to do that for, but you did it so that we might do it. And God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I didn't get it, that I was so caught up. But Lord, I ask that you forgive me, and you be with me, and you be with everyone here. Lord, as we wash our brothers and sisters' feet, that the sins that you have forgiven will be washed away with them, Lord. Lord, forgive us. Only you can forgive. And thank you for sending your Son down to die for us, even though he didn't deserve it. Lord, you love us so much, and we love you because of it. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I'll see you all here very soon.